Today we'll be covering how to connect and configure a controller in the most basic senses. To start, open up RapidCore. Connect it. You will hear a sound indicating that it's connected. You will then see the connected controller show up. Note that the color indicating the status of the controller is green, meaning both the firmware and the version of RapidCore are compatible. If it is yellow, this may indicate that the firmware version, as well as the RapidCore version, need to be changed in order to be compatible. At this point, it'd be good at seeing if there's a new version of RapidCore available or if there's a new version of firmware available on the website. Alternatively, it could be an indicator that there is something wrong with the driver on the computer, in which case simply disconnecting the controller and reconnecting it will fix it in most cases. If it does not, the next step would be to power cycle the controller, reconnect it, and see if that clears the issue. You may need to restart your computer if this continues to not go away, as the Microsoft driver is simply just not initializing. Typically, after a restart in these circumstances, it will fix the issue. Now then, to work with the controller, simply select the tick box here. Read settings will be selected by default, and by default, opening the settings will be the next step. Click OK. We have now read the settings from the controller, and we are also now linked. You can tell that we are linked as we are looking at the controller, the serial number of the controller, the firmware version loaded onto the controller, as well as the hardware version. And you'll note that it says to unlink instead of the link option. From here, we can also read and store settings. Now, to configure the controller, you can simply go through any of the settings you would want. In this particular case, like with any sensor, we'll now select a sensor port. In this case, sensor input 1. By default, it will bring up one of the compatible sensors for that port for that type of signal. So fuel level are automatically configured to have the desired types of sensors that are directly compatible with the unit. In this particular case, we'll be using an analog sensor that will require us to create a custom sensor table. With the sensor type selected as custom, we'll now go here, make sure the build table is selected. If it is not already checked off by default, you'll have to check it, and this will open up the additional options here. We will name the table fuel level. We will select our input type as voltage for 0 to 5 volt, 0.4 or 0.5 to 4.5 volt, or 1 volt to 5 volt. The unit type will be default as level because we are selected as a fuel level sensor. Now we will edit the table. Now that we have the sensor table utility open, we will add 2 slots for our high and low range. In this particular case, we'll be configuring a 0.5 volt to 4.5 volt sensor. 0.5 will be our bottom, showing 0% fuel level. And our top end will be 4.5 volt to correspond to 100% full. At this point, we'll press apply, in which case you'll see the changes take effect. Then simply press OK. If you don't necessarily care to see the changes take effect, simply press OK and it will update the table accordingly. Now that we've updated the settings the way we want them, we can now press store. Before we do that, you can now select the bypass time or configure the bypass time, the warnings and failure points. You can also disable them from here. The bypass time is the amount of time that after startup, we will ignore the status of the sensor. This allows the system to get to a normal operating range so that any ambient noise or vibration will typically have settled out by then. With this in mind, we will now click store. It will begin storing the settings to the controller. At this point, make sure no power is removed from the controller and do not disconnect the USB prematurely. We'll hear the USB ring to indicate it's both disconnected and reconnected, as the unit must power cycle during this automatic procedure. You'll see that it says finished, and then you can press OK. The settings have now been successfully stored to the unit, and you are ready to use it. Now you can simply disconnect the USB. It will show still connected up here. However, we know that is not. It doesn't matter if you unlink this or link this, but if you were to connect the controller again, you would want to unlink this, then plug the unit back in. Click link. Select the controller, press OK, and we are now linked to settings again. This isn't necessary if you simply want